Good afternoon. A massive weekend of football. It was full of momentum shifts and some big stories, including Jack Higgins. I want to discuss the role of the big forwards over the weekend. Cameron and King spoke to King post-game last night. I'll play you that. Also want to discuss the latest from Collingwood. They've suffered a significant blow in the form of Jordan De Goey ahead of a clash that could have them 3-1 against West Coast. A bit of a blow for the Pies last night. Also want to discuss the latest on this, I described it as a developing story the Age had from Hawthorn on Saturday. But first off, today, I want to discuss Damien Harvey, who had these comments post-match on the broad issue of COVID. The Richmond coach weighing in on some pretty big public policy.
Sydney Stack didn't play in the VFL today. Is there an issue there?
Close contact.
Okay.
So, yeah. If we could just get rid of the close contact rule, Dan, that would be terrific. Make everyone's life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah.
Dimma versus Dan. That's the way it's been billed on the Herald Sun, the front of the Herald Sun today. This has been a bubbling issue in footy for some time because a lot of players and staff are obviously close contacts, not actual positive cases, and they're ruled out for 7 days. So clearly, Harvick's a little bit off script because the AFL so far has been very much guided by government policy, state government policy and federal government policy. Simon Goodwin came out and supported Hardwick this morning, echoing some frustration on the part of clubs in regards to this. I didn't mind the response from the Andrews government minister, Jayla Pulford, who did think that Mr. Hardwick's comments, according to the Herald Sun, were made out of frustration. I think Damien Hardwick's comments were probably more about the frustration of the result than the game of football. She might be calling out Dimma there for perhaps creating a bit of a diversionary tactic because, of course, Richmond did lose by 33 points. And one of the other biggest stories in the game, which I sort of report sensitively because I realise there's a welfare component to this. Their best player, Dustin Martin, is still out of action and hasn't returned, my understanding, to the club since he left the club 2.5 weeks ago. So there's a couple of other side stories there. But Dimma very much putting the isolation rules and state government policy on the agenda last night. Latest on Jack Higgins. The word I get from St Kilda today is that Higgins is totally fine following his concussion in the first quarter. Yesterday he was subbed out, Higgins. The reason for the obvious concern here is that Higgins had 2 rounds of surgery in 2019 for brain bleeds, and he admitted at the time that he could have been paralysed or died from that condition. That was caused by a birth abnormality that was treated with surgery, and St Kilda have said overnight they've got no major fears in regard to this concussion. He'll do the 12 days and play after that. They're not worried beyond that issue. But it's one I will follow up with some doctors. Clearly, you don't like to see the brain bleed surgery situation with an additional concussion, but that's the word I get from St Kilda sources today that he's totally fine and should be right beyond 12 days to play. He was in the rooms last night, wasn't carted off or anything like that to hospital, which is good news for Jack Higgins. Fingers crossed on that front. For mine, one of the most interesting footy stories over the weekend was the role of the big forwards, in particular the impact of Jeremy Cameron and Max King. I'll start with Cameron. I mean, full credit to the Cats. They chased him. They invested the money up to $1 million a year. You know, if Collingwood had Cameron, which they didn't on Saturday night, they would have won. I thought Cameron was absolutely brilliant. It just highlights the role still of that big power forward in the game. And if you ever wanted more proof, Max King yesterday, 2 dominant performances now against Fremantle and Richmond. He had a quiet day, King. He kicked his 4 goals in the last quarter, taking his first main contested mark in the third quarter. But boy, he got going, and I spoke with Max post-game in the rooms.
I guess it was just sticking to what I've been doing. It wasn't as involved as I would have liked in the first 3 quarters, but it's just going back to what I know and trying to stay involved and keep working. And I know eventually that it's going to come, so it's just how long I can stick to that sort of process.
It's a pleasure seeing.
I guess, it's nice to know on those games where everything's not going your way that I can still really have an impact, whether it's in the last half or the last quarter. So, the next step for me is trying to put a full game together of good footy, but really exciting what the group did tonight.
I think just from a recruitment perspective, guys like Max King take time to develop. Max really coming into his own now. He's, I guess, being compared in some instances. I think Ben Dixon commented overnight that perhaps he's like a young Buddy Franklin. Hopefully he is. I know that's a massive rap. I mean, hopefully he could be half of what Buddy is, but he's doing a magnificent job. Max King, a lot of clubs would be thinking to themselves today and on an ongoing basis where they'll find their next big power forward, the next Cameron or King or Tom Hawkins. They're very hard to find. They take time to develop. Sam Wiedemann, for mine, would be an interesting one if he doesn't get a regular game with Melbourne throughout, particularly the second half of this year. There's no doubt in my mind that clubs would be looking at someone like that because they're very, very hard to find, these key forwards. Jordan De Goey will miss the Pies clash against West Coast this Saturday afternoon. That's a blow for the Pies, who are aiming to go 3-1. You think a significant chance of doing that based on their form and also the way West Coast are travelling. But that's a blow. It's that sling tackle. The AFL don't like it. Collingwood's accepted that MRO ruling. It was against Dangerfield, and they'll just have to. I guess the players are perfectly aware, I'm told, of what to do in regards to those sling tackles, and it breached the rules. It wasn't the fact that Dangerfield wasn't injured that sort of helped to go in this situation, because it didn't, because the AFL amended the rules to take into account clearly the potential impact of injury, and that's why it was graded as 1 week yesterday. Just on Collingwood, their fade-out will be a discussion point this week. They were 30 points up against Geelong in pole position at three-quarter time. Look, it's clear that in the fourth term, they stopped winning the contested ball, and Jeremy Cameron started to get better supply. But I think one issue that Collingwood's acutely aware of is they've got this relentless pressure game plan that's brilliant to watch. It was like 2010 Mick Malthouse style for mine in the third quarter, the way they swarmed around the ball. It's a bit like inventing a Formula One car that sets pole position but doesn't go the full distance, the race distance. Collingwood, I guess, this week have to assess whether their game plan is sustainable for 4 quarters and can run out the match. Hopefully, for their sake, it can, because it's producing plenty of exciting footy at the moment. I'll leave you with 2 issues. The first, the Giants. The second, Hawthorn. Want to get to Hawthorn, but I'll start with Leon Cameron. Last week, there was some talk that perhaps Leon would want to revisit whether he wants to coach, and it's in his best interests at the end of the year. That's unverified, that story, but certainly was doing the rounds. And it was interesting in the context of that discussion that Leon himself put his coaching contract, I guess, on the agenda in response to a question post-game on the weekend, and acknowledged that the Giants and Leon had agreed to park those discussions until post-season.
Assess that at the end of the year. We'll park it to the end of the year, which I think is a really good decision on both parties, because, I'm a 9th-year coach of 10 years at the footy club. Sometimes trying to work through a contract in the hurly-burly of week in, week out footy is pretty full on. And clearly, if you're under the pump or you're out of contract, people are going to always ask that question. So I think it's a really smart decision from the footy club. It's an honest decision. And both parties are on the same page. When the season finishes, we assess.
My understanding is recently Leon's management did seek to get an extension on his contract. Now, clearly, I think it's fairly clear the Giants have pushed back on that, and they've had some mature discussions where they've both sat down and said, look, let's revisit this at the end of the year. It's a very mature way of going about it. It's not dissimilar, Leon's language there, to some of the language from Bucks last year. Obviously, it's got to suit Leon. It's got to suit the Giants. He's been there for a long time. They've gone to the well a few times, and he wants to concentrate on the season at hand and his wealth of talent, and obviously just wants to... It's pretty hard to navigate the season, as he said, as well as the contract talk. So it makes a lot of sense. It will create a lot of continued discussion, though, particularly, obviously, based on their win-loss record, how that goes this year, and the fact that James Hird is there, the players like him, and he is well placed to, I guess, have a look at that job if it suited the Giants, if they didn't want Leon, and if Hirdy wanted to go ahead with that. But there's a lot of water to pass under the bridge in that regard. And just finally, The Age and Caroline Wilson had a significant story regarding Cyril Rioli and the Hawthorn Football Club on Saturday. Look, I refer you to the article, but the crux of part of the story is that Cyril doesn't feel comfortable going back to the Hawks based on some incident with Jeff Kennett and a previous example of racism back to 2013 concerning a comment made in regards to another player's wife. Jeff Kennett hasn't spoken so far over the course of the weekend. He is, until at least today, in isolation with COVID. I've reached out to him again. The club isn't speaking at this stage today beyond their statement on Saturday and what Sam Mitchell said post-match. Mitchell unaware of what purportedly happened in 2013. He's trying to resolve issues, Mitchell said, with Cyril. Naturally, of course, he wants him to attend their 10-year reunion next year. I spoke to the AFL about this issue overnight, in particular their Indigenous boss, Tanya Hosh. It was an interesting conversation, but in summary, the AFL's principal concern here is Cyril's welfare. This will take some time, Tanya thinks, to resolve, because it's not solely about Kennett's ripped jeans comment to Cyril's wife, Shannon. There's potentially cumulative examples of racism or potential racism, which might have built up over a period of time. So in the background, clearly the AFL is going to do some work reaching out to Cyril. Look, I thought the most significant claim in Caro's article was the one of racism from a player back in 2013. So it's not all about Jeff Kennett. There's been a little bit of a pile-on in that regards over the weekend. Having said that, I think clearly we need to know more facts, and there's no sign at this stage that Hawthorn will formally investigate the incident further and the source of Cyril's concerns. Having said that, I think we will hear at some stage further from Hawthorn this week. But that's an interesting story in the background because as Eddie bets, I think that Chance Bateman and also Chris Johnson said over the weekend, it's very important in their view to respect the fact that the Riolis feel this way. So it's an interesting story that I think is going to continue to develop this week. Look, that's the latest from a busy news perspective on a Monday. Plenty of other stories out of the weekend. Most notably, I think, North Melbourne very much under the pump from a performance perspective. We'll have all the latest news on Thursday and Friday on my Triple M podcast. Don't miss Triple M Footy throughout the week. Thanks for joining us.
That was Tom Browne's news. Come back every Monday, Thursday and Friday for more and subscribe to Triple M Footy on Listener or wherever you listen to get all our podcasts throughout the season. For Ream Hot Water and McDonald's, Triple M rocks footy.